Hi, everybody. David Fogel here, CEO and co-founder of the Symphonina Foundation. It's my great pleasure to be with Grammy winner Danae, Xanthe, Vlasse. Danae, how are you?
I'm really happy to speak with you, David. We've been friends for a few months and we're finally getting to do this. I'm so glad.
Yes, and you have the great honor also of being a current Grammy nominee for Mythologies II in the Classical Compendium category. And your Grammy Award was for the original Mythologies from 3 years ago, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you're amazing. Good memory. Thank you.
Okay, all right, good, good, good. So I do want to start a little bit before mythology is the original with you in our conversation because I think it's important to know how you got into music and how it has influenced you as a person and your career. And let's try to make that connection for other people who might be getting into music at a young age. And then we can talk a little bit more about mythologies and mythologies too and all the nifty stuff behind that.
Sure. Yeah, my background in music is that I started piano at the age of 5. I actually can't remember my first piano lesson. I might have been a little younger than 5. But roughly speaking, it's been a part of me since my first memories were formed. And as a huge measure of encouragement to anyone who struggled with practicing, I hated practicing. I fought my parents. I went through many phases of wanting to quit. And still, somehow, my parents convinced me to keep going. Little by little, by my early teenage years, I was good enough to be in competitions, and I was in a very healthy environment in a studio with a teacher who had a lot of creativity and gave me a lot of leeway and a lot of structure at the same time. And what really worked in the dynamic of my relationship with this teacher was that she kind of got my mother out of the picture, which
Mm.
was a real source of friction. The issue around practicing was actually kind of a friction point with my mom. So as soon as my mother stepped out of the practice space and gave me the way to practice for myself and gave me a way to practice for my teacher, I found a purpose and a direction for that effort that wasn't about resisting my mother.
Mm.
And so that should be a good guide for parents. There's a balancing act between providing the necessary structure for a child, which means a routine of where and when to practice that's very organized daily, and also knowing how to step back and let the child do music for themselves, for music for the teacher. And to the teachers involved, the effort is to figure out how to keep the child interested in the repertoire itself. The individual pieces really matter, which is why as I continue to teach today, I've been teaching for over 20 years now, I always work with my students with the expectation that as soon as we can, which is a really early intermediate level, I invite them to start selecting repertoire. I give them choices and I talk to them about which films they've been watching and what video games they're playing in order to discover if there's music in those realms that could appeal to them. And either we find arrangements or I make them. And increasingly, we're able to sort of ask AI to fill those gaps too. And
Interesting. Okay. Mhm.
there are AI programs that'll allow you to they'll listen to a theme and generate sheet music. I'm not a huge fan of AI in music, but given that it's coming, I'm looking for ways to not hate every aspect of it because
Yes.
it does not replace a human being. There's nothing about the arts that I see. I mean, I want AI to be a tool, not a replacement for humanity. So I look for ways in my teaching to do what my teacher did for me and to give a direction and a sense of autonomy over the creative process so that children can actually take control of the things they want to learn. Because in a regimented learning environment where standardized testing is still the norm across the educational spectrum, I feel my role as an educator is to finally relieve that pressure and give kids some structure, yes, some things they need to learn how to read, how to, right? There are basic elements of music making that are unavoidable. A good technique requires practice. However, I make those a means to an end, which is the creative side. So I teach composition and I teach really creative ways of working. So it keeps kids interested and they feel as though they finally have some agency in their lives about what they're doing and how they learn. That is what worked for me as a student, and it's what kept me in music long enough to get to the point where I was good enough to actually project that into my future, thinking about it being a professional move. So once I was in music, more committed, things got a lot easier. But I won't hide the fact that I did go through major burnout in college as an undergraduate and really questioned my path again, and actually applied for a master's degree in ethnomusicology, thinking I couldn't bear the
Mm,
hours and hours of practicing to keep doing a performance degree. I
yeah.
ended up changing my mind and sticking with performance in the master's, but there I really learned a lot, and the process of questioning your path is really just a reflection of the effort and the struggle that you're in the moment. And I think it's important for people around you, whether that's your teachers, your family, your friends, to recognize that even when you know you're doing something that you're good at and that's a calling, the difficult times require inordinate amounts of support, and to always have the
Yeah.
option to make
So
choices.
let's go back a little bit. Were your parents musicians themselves?
No.
No. So what was the impetus then for, I guess it was your mom, to get you started on piano lessons and then, to get in the way a little bit
My
or a
mother
lot?
had always, yeah, a lot. My mother had
Yeah.
always wanted to study music for herself, and I wish she had, along with her children. And so when I see parents today express a desire, I say, listen, I teach adults too. Why not
Yeah.
lessons as well? Because I don't want a parent putting that kind of pressure to live vicariously through their child if that's not authentically the child's desire.
Right. Right. So I don't know if you know, but I played jazz piano at the Catamaran Hotel here in San Diego for 16 years from 1994 to 2010.
Wow.
And I weekly, Friday night from like 6 to 8 typically, and then sometimes Sunday, so sometimes twice a week. And we get all sorts of requests for things and different audiences because at that location it's in Pacific Beach in San Diego. And for those who don't know San Diego, that's kind of a beachy, young adult area where people would go mainly to have fun, which means drink. And then there's also a boat that goes on the bay and goes to different hotels, which means generally more drinking. But also, we would have British tourists who would come and they would visit San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, Las Vegas, fly home, things like that. So I would get all sorts of different requests. But one of the things that I would get would be people who would come up to me and say, "I wish I had started playing piano," and I would look at them and they'd be 40 or 50 or maybe 60 years old, whatever they were, and they would say they're too old. And for me, I would always tell them if it was something you really wanted to do, it's never too late to start. And then they would say, "Well, I'll never be as good as you," which is very complimentary. I appreciate that. But I say, "Well, you might be because you don't know, but what really matters, I think, whether you're young or old, and probably even matters more when you're old because your brain gets a little bit less pliable, I guess, is diligently practicing every day for a certain amount of time." And what I would tell them is like, if you practice 30 minutes a day, every day, or most days anyway, in a year to 3 years, you're going to be playing what you want to play. And then you'll have a basis for going forward from there if you want to continue to do it to become quote unquote as good as you want to become in the time that you have, right? You can go from there. But if you don't consistently apply that practice, then you probably won't be able to get there. But if you do something, almost anything, for 30 minutes a day for 3 years, you'd probably be really pretty good. You may not be like a pro, you may not be playing professionally at a hotel or something, or if you're doing art, you may not be drawing pictures that people pay thousands of dollars for, but you'll get a sense of satisfaction from it, and you'll also feel like you're contributing something with what you're creating. You're creating things generally for other people to enjoy.
Mhm.
So I think that's really true, whether it's for adults or for kids. But I too had a burnout when I was 13, so I totally empathize with what you're saying there. So I'm glad that you were able to push through all that. And I do have to ask you, when you were doing your master's degree for performance, did you ever think about doing something that would focus on composition? Because obviously you're a tremendous composer, and that doesn't always come from people who focus on performance. You can be an absolutely world-class performer and not compose really at all,
Mhm.
or you can maybe make that transition and be the great composer that you are. So how did that come about?
I'll actually come to this question in a moment. I want to just touch on what you were saying about
Yeah.
adult students and that struggle first. Um, I teach a lot of adults, and my longest standing adult student has been with me for 17 years now.
Hmm.
And so the perspective from working in that way, and I want this to be a real source of encouragement for listeners, that you can be 40 years old and start out as a beginner and be 15 years later playing Beethoven, the masters, the music, Brahms, anything you love is actually accessible. And the way that I would approach that for adult students is to make everything really bite-sized. It works for kids too, but with adult students, one of the big challenges is how many things they juggle in their lives, and that they often don't have a great deal of routine because kids come first and the job has to take precedence, etc. So usually when people are told that they have to commit to practicing, it becomes an unbearable, overwhelming projection. So the question is usually, can you manage 20 minutes a day? Can you do 20 or 30 minutes? And then I make sure it's extremely supported. So the way I approach that, I teach over Zoom, and the real gift is that I can video record lessons. So what I would do with a student, especially an adult, I would say, look, why don't we meet twice a week for half an hour for your lessons? And if you can do Mondays and Thursdays, for example, or Tuesdays and Fridays, there's a space between lessons where all you need to do is sit down with the recording that we're making during your lesson to guide your practicing for the next 3 days. And that way they feel extremely supported. It's very
Great
clear
idea.
what to do every single day.
Yep, great idea.
And then to your other point, your other question was about composition.
Yeah.
I have had, this is why I really struggled to call myself a composer for a really long time. I have had zero compositional training, period. And I expressed a great deal of interest in composition actually very young. And this is my only criticism of my teacher, who was amazing in every other way. The teacher that I worked with as a child, my primary teacher who led me up to collegiate studies, had zero clue about composition and zero ability to guide me as a student through a creative process like that. So I remember handing over my first composition as a child that I had tried to actually notate myself. I'm sure it was horrible. I'm sure my efforts were completely off.
You didn't save it, huh?
But she did.
We'd want to go back to that right now and take a look, wouldn't we?
I have it. I actually.
There you go. Okay.
Parents
All right.
kept it.
All right. Sometime we'll look at it. Not during this podcast.
The notation is actually really clear, but I don't
Okay.
know if that matches with what I had in my mind.
Okay.
And my guess is, working with a bunch of kids and recently, I can say, look, kids who sit down to notate music, even if they've studied for at least 5 years, they're going to mess up horribly on how to notate. So
Right.
my guess is I may have a beautifully notated score, but it doesn't reflect whatever I played for my teacher that day, you know. So unfortunately, she didn't push that. And I went into college without that impetus to compose until I was singing with choirs in college and really fell in love with choral repertoire. And I started writing just for my own creative outlet, as though I had time. I mean, I was working 3 jobs in college full time. I don't know how I was doing it, but I wasn't sleeping a lot. I wasn't dating. I'll tell
That's
you.
how you did it.
I had no time.
Yeah.
But the point is that, again, with that process and again, that school, everyone did what they could with the resources that they had. And there was no composition program at my undergraduate university. And none of the faculty could guide me in that direction when I showed interest. So once again, that door was closed for me. And I went into a master's in performance because I didn't have a portfolio of compositions to even apply in composition. And so when I started composing in earnest, it was after finishing collegiate years, after starting a teaching studio, after getting established and finding instances in life where I was going through experiences of grief and needed to get it out. And composition came, not vocal and choral, which is just about all I had any interest in writing up till my mid-20s, but all of a sudden piano music started to come through. And I avoided it because there are so many icons in piano writing that I didn't want to touch. I kept thinking, I can't add anything to this genre. But that's where the music started to come through for me because I needed to process in some form. And so that's how I began composing in my mid-20s, with no intention but just to do it as a therapeutic process for myself. Little by little, I was building up quite a lot of repertoire, and my students, particularly my advanced students, were really excited to perform these pieces. They were taking them into all kinds of performances, and little by little I started testing the water and submitting to little competitions and
That's
doing well
great.
with that.
Yeah.
So it was a process of just growing, and finally, being approached by this amazing violinist with the LA Philharmonic, Misha Lefkovitz, who said to me, I really want you to write for me. Hey, from there, we had fun. Let's record some stuff together. And
Yeah, yeah.
the impetus came because I had performers who were telling me they wanted to perform my music. So things grew out of that.
Well, when you go from piano composition to composition, I hope I didn't say competition, composition to orchestral composition, that's a leap that a lot of people don't either want to take or don't take. So what was that like for you when you moved from piano to composing for
Terrifying.
orchestra? All right. So how did you get over that then?
Uh,
Right? I mean, you go from, terrified to you're recording with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra at Abbey Road. So we have some bridge that we had crossed there. How did
no,
you
I
get
had help.
across the bridge?
I had orchestrators. I had help. So I was trusting an incredible team and believing that if everyone believed in me, then I could believe in myself. And there's
Okay.
another lesson. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So if you're working, all right. So if you're working with someone who's arranging your vision, how does that iteration go? Does it just generally go like, oh, they got it the first time? I can hardly imagine that's true. So how do you communicate with people who are helping you to get it to be the way you want it to be when you go? Because I presume like when you go to record anything with an orchestra, my analogy is it's like lighting a rocket ship, you have to do all the prep beforehand because once you've lit it, it's going to go where it's going to go, and
Yeah.
it better go to orbit, and it better dock with whatever it's supposed to dock with nicely, or you have to do it all over again. So what is that process like for you to take it from an idea in your mind to a piano sketch to an orchestration to okay, this is ready to be played by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra?
It takes an enormous amount of faith and a degree of madness. A lot like the rocket analogy. I like that a lot. Someone told me that actually rockets, when they're given a trajectory, that's clear, that's programmed, but 97% of the path of the rocket is recalibration, realigning. And so actually, it looks seamless and beautiful and easy from the outside, but that rocket is working constantly to reassess, recalibrate, recenter, realign. That's the same process with the orchestral projects. Yes, you do everything you can ahead of time, knowing that you will spend the entire recording session recalibrating, realigning, readjusting, redirecting.
Right.
And that's exactly what we did.
And then afterwards too, in post-production, you have to do all the
Yeah.
engineering
Oh,
work too.
yeah. But I mean, literally, in the moment in the studio, going, we have a balance issue. Let's drop a trombone.
Yep.
Or hey, can we drop the dynamics on the tuba because it's overpowering? Or these are things you go in with an amazing team of people who are doing an incredible job. Everyone's at the top of their game, and you all consistently have to realign and readjust all the time.
Right. Okay, let's go to mythology. So we go through all that, and then I'm going to say probably, I'm guessing now, so you tell me, I'm going to think 2 to 3 years before Mythologies is released, you start working on it. Am I close?
For
Okay.
sure. In the
Yeah.
case of the first album, some of
Yeah.
that music I had been writing even more than 3 years prior. I didn't know it would be part of a unified album at the time. I just knew I was inspired by Greek myths, and I was writing one piece on this theme and then another piece, and inspired by the first one, I would continue. And little by little, I was releasing other albums before Mythologies. So I was also distracted in doing all that and promoting those projects, but I was constantly in the background continuing to return to the concept of Greek myths. And little by little, I realized, I have half an album here. What would it take to take the rest and finish it and really unify the project? So that's how the first Mythologies album was born. And even it did not contain all the Greek themed pieces that I've written to this point. So there are loose ends. There are all kinds of precursors to Mythologies itself. And
So did you start on Mythologies 2 before Mythologies was released then, because you had this extra stuff that you still wanted to talk about, or did you wait to see how Mythologies would be received and then got started on Mythologies 2 after you found out it was received extremely well?
I started writing material for Mythologies 2 the week that we released Mythologies 1.
Okay.
I did not wait to see what would happen. I just knew I was inspired and I had more stories to tell.
Yeah.
Likewise, Mythologies 2 was released in July. I started in January toying around with the next musical idea. Now, to be fair, I worked on it in February and March and I haven't touched it since.
Okay.
I've just not had time. But
Yeah.
I'm already thinking and planning and considering what happens next. More music is coming for sure. There's so much, a wealth of material. Yeah.
Right. So does it take 3 years in your process, because everybody's process is different, right? Does it take 3 years? Is that what you're expecting, let's say, for Mythologies 3, whenever it's ready and whatever the content is? Or do you think that it's we're going to be able to enjoy that sooner? Please.
Oh gosh. No, I think it's going to take me longer. I think
No. That wasn't one of the options I gave you.
3 years to the next one. It's possible, but obviously, as you understand, funding is a real issue.
Yes, of course, sure.
The only way to accelerate timelines is to have more funding. And still, there are parameters of timelines you can't get around. I won't rush the creative process. And I want to make sure that, especially as I move into a place in my career where my projects are bigger and bolder, that I really not forget about my needs and my health and my own creative space, and preserve a quality of life for everything and everyone around me, and for relationships to thrive. Because when you are completely all consumed by a creative endeavor, it takes everything out of you. That's just the nature of the passion of the work that we do.
Yeah. And you still have students and you have your family, so
Yeah.
and your
Yeah,
cat that we talked about before. So we had,
my parents are 80 and 90 years old now.
Yeah.
And my mother had a health challenge and was hospitalized for 6 weeks this fall, right in the 6 hardest weeks of promotion for this album. And it was really gut-wrenching for me to not be able to just go and be there.
Right.
But I knew I couldn't give up 3 years of work on this project. She didn't want me to. She didn't ask me to come. She said, stand by.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have wanted to have had more flexibility to just be there. And so I have to be very mindful moving forward that I have enough leeway in my life to accommodate big life events.
Definitely a balancing act with all the things that we do in life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's come back to the appeal of Mythologies 2, both to younger but also older and established audiences. By established, I mean people who are already listening to classical music. As we know, the Symphonina Foundation promotes symphony music mainly to younger audiences, but younger is younger than me, and that's just about everybody. So it's no problem to speak about people in their 40s as being younger. What is the best way in your mind for someone to approach Mythologies 2, the music, and the vocals, the story, if they have not been into operatic music or symphony music at all, really? What would be the best way for them to approach it?
Well, Hollywood has done a lot of the work for me by creating films that are on themes that people can relate to. So most people have seen Clash of the Titans. I'm not talking about the one from 40 years ago. I'm talking about the more recent one. And while
Except I saw the one from 40 years ago, but okay, here we are.
Well, I haven't seen that one, but I have seen the more recent one.
Okay.
The visuals were stunning. The actors were all good. The writing was spotty, and frankly, they ruined the story. But aside from all that,
all right. Back to accentuating the positive around here.
the visuals were sublime.
Uh-huh.
They nailed the special effects, and what they did was cinematic and stunning and worth seeing, but it's not the whole story. And they watered a lot of things down. They oversimplified things, and I think that it's a shame because it doesn't serve the art, and it certainly doesn't highlight why these stories have survived thousands of years. I think that when you have tales that hold today after 3,000 years, I mean, Homer's Odyssey was written 3,000 years ago, right? So when you think about that, you have to understand there's something about these myths that's much deeper and speaks to the sort of the kernels of humanity, of what it means to encode in a story what we value as a society, what it means to have faith, what it means to be courageous, what it means to go through what's encapsulated in, if nothing else, in the Odyssey, the hero's journey, to face struggle and to persevere, and then to overcome impossible odds. These are not just wild passing tropes of some fad. This is integral to the human experience. And it's something that keeps coming back in narrative storytelling that has remained consistent in mythologies, no matter the culture, across the globe. And so I think that's the thing we have to understand and relate to. And it's actually what Hollywood tries to show us in every film. There's always a moment of struggle with the hero, etc. But they could do so with a great deal more nuance sometimes. Of course, sometimes they get it right. But there's an amazing film called The Return that's about to come out December 6th. I look forward to seeing that. It's specifically about King Odysseus returning home after 20 years away from his island of Ithaca. And Ithaca is close to my heart because it's where my father was born.
Okay.
So I feel as though this is in my blood. And I have high hopes for that film because it's Ralph Fiennes, and I'm really hoping that they do a better job than Clash of the Titans, which was more interested in special effects than storytelling or character development. But the way that stories can be told, even if stories can be told musically, even if listeners don't have an experience with opera and don't have an experience with symphonic works, if they can approach the music from understanding that it's a auditory narrative instead of a purely visual one, which is so much of what we do by watching movies, then we invite their imagination to fill in the gaps. And my hope with Mythologies as we move forward and as this music gets performed, it's that there would be concert settings in which we can give a little bit of a hint of what opera might be, which is a little bit of staging, tiny bit of costuming, some visual elements, maybe projections that can bring the audience a little bit more, let's say give them parameters for the story in a way that's a little bit visually stimulating, rather than asking them to sit through a 13-minute work, or in the case of the big suite Andromeda, that's a 20-minute piece, which on the album is broken up into 6 chapters. But ultimately, if audiences can know the story that's unfolding as they listen, they will be captivated. We performed this near Dallas with an orchestra in the Allen Philharmonic in April. And the vast majority of that audience was not a classical audience, and it was an extremely young audience. The marketing they did for that concert was phenomenal, and they filled their hall, they nearly filled it, with people who are not subscription ticket holders to their season. They pulled off what every symphony orchestra dreams of. And they had young people in the audience, and they had non-traditional listeners. And it worked. People were so excited. We had a meet and greet with the audience in the hall afterwards. We were swarmed with enthusiastic young people bringing bouquets of flowers, saying how excited they were. These stories were really visceral for them.
Awesome.
And what was amazing is that we should never underestimate this, but kids actually know these stories better than adults because the kids are studying this stuff in school, so it's close to them. Their video games that they play are often mythologically themed. Obviously the movies they watch. So the parents can be a lot more disconnected from these stories than the children.
Right. A question for you. So if someone goes to listen to the album, let's say on Spotify,
sure,
they're just going to listen, right? But but all the backstory about, and let's take Medusa for example, right? They might not know it, or they might not get it just listening in real time. So do you have a website that people can go to that supports the album, where they could get all that backstory and maybe read that ahead of time as some prerequisite, if we would say in college language?
Good, yeah, thank you. Yes, the website is my first name and my last name, danaevlasse.com.
Okay, we're going to spell that for everybody here on this podcast. Go ahead.
It's DANAEVLASSE.
Perfect. Okay.
And then once you're there, you just go to the tab for albums, and you can see both of the Mythologies albums. You can read about and view them. You can stream directly from the website and view the music videos that we've done. For the most recent album, we did a lyric video for Medusa, where you can get the lyrics and get the story there on screen with animations that are kind of video game inspired. And it's very contemporary. It's really going to work for kids and hopefully appeal to adults as well. And it guides listeners through the story. For the previous album, Mythologies I, we released a stunning music video of mermaids. We found professional mermaids, and it's called Sirens. So people can view that. And again, it's a way of taking viewers through a 12-minute story from the perspective of the sailor who's being called by these sirens and who meets his fate with the sirens. It's visceral, and absolutely, in the case of that particular album, Mythologies I, almost became eclipsed by this music video. I've had many people accidentally refer to that album as Sirens without realizing that was one track of the album.
Right.
So that one was a really, really big hit.
What is it, when you think about which orchestra you want to have record your work, is the Royal Philharmonic like always at the top for you? Or, I mean, it's at the top of the world, but there are many orchestras that are at the top of the world too. Is that where you naturally gravitate to want to have your work performed, or do you have other options?
I would love to have every option in the world. We went with Abbey Road and two options, which was Royal Philharmonic or London Symphony Orchestra, because that was the relationships that were in place in terms of where we were with the sponsorship for this project.
Okay.
But I mean, one of my great, great dreams would be to see my music performed by the LA Philharmonic at Disney Hall.
Yes, right?
You know?
Well,
So
you have to give us a heads up when that's happening so that we can get the word out.
No, I mean, there are so many incredible
other people.
orchestras. I just really would welcome it. I'm so happy with any orchestra of quality that can do this music. And I'd be so excited to see this performed and to see it done live and not just recorded, although that's extremely precious as well.
Yes, I will say I had the privilege, really, of seeing your performance at the event that you had before the Grammys up in Los Angeles. And even without a full orchestra there, it was just absolutely terrific. I can only imagine what it'd be like if it's performed live on stage. It'd be great. So if there's any promoters out there listening, contact Danae. But speaking of contacting Danae, how do people get in touch with you?
Oh, the easiest.
I've called you Danae so for as long as I've known you, and now I've learned it's Danae. So it's going to take me a little time to get through this. But anyway, how do people get in touch with you?
Really, the easiest way is to reach me through my website.
Okay, do you have a contact page there?
Contact page
at
there.
daneevlasse.com. So look for
That's
contact, right. And it'll go. And then how just are you good at getting back to people right away, or should they be patient because you have a lot of things going on?
I have a lot of things going on, but I'm typically pretty quick in responding. Yeah.
Good. All right.
Another way is to reach me through social media channels, but
Okay.
There the issue is that messages really do get lost.
So you prefer going through the contact page on your website?
For serious inquiries, please.
Yes, for serious inquiries.
If
The promoter should get you through the web page. Everybody else can do it however they do it.
If it's an audience member who just casually wants to say hi, then any form is great. But yeah,
Yeah.
serious inquiries for collaboration and work and programming and anything like that, please use my website.
Well, Danae, thank you so much. It's been great, and we wish you the best of success as you go for the Grammy this year. And I'm sure
Thank
we'll
you.
be in touch as we go on in time here. So thank you again.
I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you for doing this. And thank you for the work that you're doing with the Symphonina Foundation, because I personally find the work extremely close to my purpose as a creator. I find the great alignment between my intention and the work that you're doing. So I'm a very big fan and really want to see Symphonina thriving. And I would love to help in that process.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll make sure that you do. And until then, everybody, we'll see you on the next podcast. Thank you.